I've always believed that one should grow old with dignity, never to ask, never to complain, never to remind you of your ailments. That's how my Catherine went, quietly, calmly, without a word. She just didn't wake up one morning. A stroke, the doctors said. Quick and painless, if that can be any consolation. I'm 62, and for 4 years I've lived alone in this big house on Oak Street. Minot is not the busiest city in North Dakota, but it has always been home to me. I worked here for 35 years as a project engineer for Heartland Construction, raised my daughter here, and buried my wife here. It's Sunday, the day of the family dinner. Helen and Clark come once a month, a tradition I maintain with manic persistence. I cook all day. Roast beef, potato casserole, green beans, apple pie, all Helen's favorites from childhood, although I think she switched to quinoa and avocado a long time ago. "Dad, you know we're watching Carbs," is the first thing I hear from my daughter as she enters the house. She kisses me on the cheek, a quick, formal touch. "It's hard to change habits at my age anymore," I reply, trying to smile. Clark enters next, carrying a bottle of wine that we both know I don't drink. The doctor forbade it after my blood pressure problems, but Clark brings wine every time, maybe for himself. "Ray, how's life in retirement? Do you still miss your blueprints and calculations?" Clark claps me on the shoulder and walks through to the living room without even waiting for an answer. I look at my daughter and her husband. Helen is in an expensive dress that I'm sure she can't afford. Clark with his new watch, which he strokes defiantly when he thinks I'm looking. The advertising agency coordinator and the real estate insurance specialist sound solid, but I know they're constantly teetering on the edge of financial trouble. "Dinner's almost ready," I say, walking back into the kitchen. At the table, as usual, Helen is talking about her work. I hear familiar words: creative solutions, target audiences, marketing strategies. Clark inserts comments about the real estate market and insurance premiums. I nod as if I understand and am interested. Actually, I'm thinking about tomorrow. I need to fix the leaky faucet in the bathroom and stop by the bank. "Dad, are you listening to me?" Helen interrupts my thoughts. "Of course, darling. You were talking about the new advertising campaign." She sighs with that special irritation I've known since her teenage years. "I was talking about the fact that we had to postpone our vacation due to unforeseen expenses. Here it is. It's starting." I reach for my wallet absent-mindedly. "How much do you need?" Clark pretends to be shocked. "Ray, this isn't why we came here," but I can see his eyes quickly assessing the situation. He exchanges a glance with Helen, and I can almost hear their silent conversation. "Dad, it's not about the money," Helen says in a tone that means it is. "It's just that we've had a rough month. Plus, Clark had to replace the transmission in the car." I pull out my checkbook. "How much did the repairs cost?" $1,200, but really, it's not worth. I write a check for $1,500. An extra $300 just in case. I always give more than they ask for. Maybe it's my attempt to buy their attention, or to make up for not being the perfect father, or to make up for not having Catherine. I don't know. Helen takes the check, barely glancing at the amount, and stashes it in her purse. "Thanks, Dad. We'll pay it back as soon as we can." We both know that's not going to happen. Just like it hasn't happened with previous loans for roof repairs, a new refrigerator, the dentist. I stopped counting somewhere around 10,000. After dinner, Clark watches soccer in the living room while Helen and I clean up the dishes. In a rare moment of intimacy, she asks, "How are you, Dad?" "Really? Not bored alone?" "I'm fine," I answer, setting the plates in the dishwasher. "I have things to do. You could move closer to us. There are some nice retirement homes in our neighborhood." I freeze with my plate in my hand. Retirement homes. My daughter wants to put me in a retirement home. "I like my home," I say firmly. "It's where I lived with your mom for 30 years. Helen rolls her eyes. "Dad, it's just a house. Rocks and wood. Mom would want you to live life to the fullest, not cling to the past. There she is, my daughter, the expert on what Catherine would want. It's times like this that it hurts me to look at Helen. She looks so much like her mother on the outside, but on the inside, she's different on the inside. I'll think about it. I lie to end the conversation. When they finally leave, I sit in my window seat and watch as their brand new SUV, another purchase beyond their means, pulls out of the driveway. Helen waves without turning around. Clark doesn't even look in my direction. The house gets quiet. I turn on the TV, but not to watch, just to hear the voices. Sometimes the silence is deafening. Monday morning, I wake up with the first ray of sunshine, an old habit of a workaholic. Even after 4 years retired, I can't sleep past 6 in the morning. My day is scheduled by the minute. Exercise, breakfast, read the newspaper, work in the garden, lunch, go to the store or library, dinner, TV, sleep. A reliable, predictable rhythm that keeps me on track. At the supermarket, I meet Alan Grierson, an old friend from my days at work. He was chief engineer at Heartland before he retired 2 years before me. "Ray, what are you doing here?" Alan shakes my hand warmly. "How was the family dinner yesterday?" Alan knows about my complicated relationship with Helen and Clark. He was at my wedding, held Helen's newborn in his arms, supported me at Catherine's funeral. The usual. We came, we ate, we took money, we left. Alan shakes his head. "You're too nice to them, Ray. They're taking advantage of you." "This is my daughter, Alan. What am I supposed to do?" "I don't know, but sometimes loving means being able to say no." I stare at the box of cereal in my basket, not knowing what to say. We both realize that I will never say no to Helen. I can't. "Will you come over tonight?" Alan asks. "We'll watch the match, talk." "Sure," I agree. We old men need to stick together. In the evening, sitting in Alan's living room with a bottle of non-alcoholic beer, I tell him about the last loan and Helen's offer to move into a retirement home. "She just wants to sell your house," Alan says bluntly. "How much is it worth now? 350,000? 400? "About 420 at the last valuation." "Exactly. Plus your savings. You've always been frugal. How much do you have in your accounts?" I answer reluctantly, a little over 800,000, 35 years of saving for retirement, plus Catherine's insurance. Alan whistles, 200 million. That's a nice inheritance, and they know it, Ray. Trust me, they're counting every dollar. I shake my head. They're not like that. Helen's my daughter. Who comes in once a month to get money and doesn't even call to see how you're doing? It's the truth, and it's painful. The last time Helen called was 3 weeks ago to ask me to pay for their country club membership. "It's for work, Dad. All important contacts are made on the golf course." I return home with a heavy heart. Alan's words roll around in my head, but I push them away. Helen is my only child, my last connection to Catherine. No matter what she does, I will always love her and help her, even if it means being used. Wednesday, I get an unexpected call from Helen. "Dad, Clark and I have some exciting news. Can we come over tonight?" There's something in her voice that makes me wary. It's too enthusiastic, too forced. But I agree. Of course I do. They arrive at 7, both unusually animated. Helen embraces me, not a quick formal touch, but a real hug. I can't remember the last time she hugged me like that. "Dad, we have a business plan," she exclaims as soon as she crosses the threshold. "Clark and I are going to start our own agency." Clark smiles, nodding. "An advertising agency with a real estate insurance department. An integrated approach. We help sell houses and insure them. The perfect combination of our skills. I invite them into the living room, offer them tea. They decline, too excited to sit down. We've done the math," Helen continues, pulling a folder of papers out of her bag. "Here's the business plan, the marketing strategy, the the financial projections. I flip through the documents, which I don't understand much. Graphs, tables, terms that have never been part of my engineering vocabulary. It looks serious, I finally say. This is our chance, Dad. Helen takes my hand. Her eyes shine with the same light that they did when she asked for a new doll or bicycle as a child. We can become independent, build something of our own. How much do you need? I ask, knowing that's where this was going. Helen and Clark look at each other. $770,000, Clark says, trying to sound businesslike. That includes office rent, equipment, advertising, salaries for the first year, licenses. I stare at them, trying to see if they're serious. $770,000 is almost all of my savings. That's a lot of money, I say quietly. Dad, we'll pay it back with interest. Helen squeezes my hand. In 3 years, the agency will start making a serious profit. You'll be an investor. You'll get dividends. I look at my daughter and see her as a little girl who dreamed of becoming a ballerina, then an artist, then a journalist. Helen was always full of big ideas, but rarely followed through. And now she's asking me to give almost everything I have to another dream. I need to think about it, I say. Sure, Dad. Helen kisses my cheek. But don't think too long. We've found the perfect office space, but it could be snatched up at any moment. They drive off, leaving a folder with a business plan. I sit in silence for a long time, poring over the papers. The numbers swirl in front of my eyes, not adding up to a coherent picture. I'm not a businessman. I'm an engineer, a man of formulas and calculations, not market forecasts and marketing strategies. I call Alan in the morning. They want $770,000 for the business, I say without preamble. How much? Alan coughs, seemingly choking on his coffee. Are you kidding me? And you're going to give it to them? I don't know, Alan. It's almost all of my savings. Exactly. Ray, listen to me. If you give them that money, you'll never see them again. Not the money, and probably not Helen and Clark. It's my daughter. I keep repeating my mantra. Who sees you as an ATM machine, not a father? Alan replies sharply. I'm sorry, but someone has to tell you the truth. His words hurt, but deep inside, I know he's right. I think back over all these years of small loans, formal visits, the way Helen and Clark look at me, not with love or respect, but with barely concealed impatience. Am I waiting for them to leave me alone? Maybe, but not at this price. The next day, Helen called again. It was unusual, 2 calls in a week when normally I might not have heard her voice for months. Dad, I was wondering if you needed any help around the house. Clark and I could come over this weekend and help with the garden or fix something. I looked at the phone in surprise, as if it could explain such strange behavior from my daughter. It's all right, Helen. I'm doing fine. But you're not getting any younger, Dad. At your age, you shouldn't overwork yourself. At my age. Helen made it sound like I was 80, not 62. I could still mow the lawn myself and change the gasket in the faucet. I'm perfectly fine, really. All right, but we'll stop by anyway. I'll make your favorite blueberry pie. Blueberry pie. My favorite pie, the one Helen hadn't made in 15 years, not since she left for college. I didn't know what to think. They arrived early on Saturday with bags of groceries and wider-than-usual smiles. Helen had actually baked a pie, not perfect, slightly burnt around the edges, but it was a real homemade blueberry pie. Clark brought in a toolkit and immediately started checking the leaky faucet in the bathroom. Ray, your gaskets are worn out? I'll replace them, he said as he set the tools down. Helen was in the kitchen, dusting the shelves, which, admittedly, I hadn't touched in a while. Dad, when was the last time you cleaned? It's like a dust museum in here. I shrugged embarrassedly. I don't remember. A month ago? A month. Helen shook her head. I'll tell you what, from now on I'll come and help you at least once a week. You can't live like this. We had lunch on the veranda for the first time in a long time. Helen laid the tablecloth that Catherine had kept for special occasions and got out some nice dishes. Clark told tales from the insurance world, and Helen laughed at his jokes with exaggerated enthusiasm. I kept feeling like I was watching some kind of play. After lunch, when Clark went to the garage to check on the tools, Helen sat down next to me on the couch. "Dad, have you thought about our proposal?" "Oh, that's what it is." "A little," I answered cautiously. $770,000 is a lot of money, Helen. "I know, Dad, but it's our only chance to get out of the rat race, you know? Clark hates his job. I'm stuck at the agency with no prospects for promotion. And here we have our own business, freedom, a chance to build something worthwhile." She spoke with such passion that for a moment I almost believed her. Almost. "What if the business doesn't work out?" I asked. "The statistics aren't on your side. Most new businesses close in the first year. But not ours." Helen took my hand. "Dad, we've done the math. Clark's in real estate, I'm in advertising. Together, we can offer something other agencies don't." I looked at my daughter, the same daughter who barely had time to call me on my birthday, and saw her turn her charm on full blast. The same look, the same intonation she'd used as a child, begging for a new toy or permission to take a late-night walk. "I need to think about it," I said, looking away. "Sure, Dad. We're not rushing you." But we both knew we weren't. The next week became a siege. Helen called every day, dropping by with lunch, sending more materials about their business idea. Clark arranged a meeting with some realtor he knew, who confirmed that the idea of an integrated agency was promising. They invited me to dinners at restaurants and took me to show me potential office space, modern, bright, in a good neighborhood. "See, Dad? Here will be the reception, there, offices for meetings with clients, and in the back, our workplaces." Helen took me around the empty room, drawing in the air future partitions and furniture. I nodded, absent-mindedly listening to her plans, unable to escape the feeling that I was being sucked into a vortex from which there was no escape. That evening, I called Alan. "They won't let up," I said, pouring myself a cup of tea. "Helen's the perfect daughter now. Clark's the caring son-in-law. They're literally stalking me with this business idea." "Because they know you're close to agreeing to it," Alan replied. "Ray, have you ever said no to Helen for anything serious in your life?" I wondered. "No, I haven't. Even when she dropped out of college after her sophomore year to find herself, I kept paying her rent. Even when she married Clark against my better judgment, I paid for the wedding. Even when they bought a house they couldn't afford, I made the down payment." "No," I admitted. "But this time it's all my savings we're talking about, Alan. If I give away $770,000, all I'll have left is the house and my pension." "Exactly. Are you sure they won't come for the house next?" I remembered talking to Helen about retirement homes. Maybe Alan was right. "What should I do?" I asked, feeling helpless. "If you really want to help them with the business, and I'm not sure it's a good idea, then don't give the whole amount at once. Offer partial financing with clear terms and paperwork. Or, best of all, say no. Say no to Helen. Easier said than done." The next day, Helen and Clark arrived again with dinner, Thai food from a restaurant I'd never tried. "You need to expand your culinary horizons, Dad," Helen said as she laid out the containers. "You can't eat the same thing all your life." I didn't bother saying that Thai food was too spicy for my stomach. Instead, I decided to finally discuss their proposal. "I've been thinking about your business plan," I began as we sat down at the table. Helen and Clark immediately put down their chopsticks, their attention focused entirely on me. "I?" Helen could barely contain her impatience. "I want to help you, I really do. But $770,000 is practically my entire savings." "We understand, Dad." Helen put her hand in mine. "And we're eternally grateful. It'll be the best investment, I promise." "But I can't just hand over that much money with no guarantees," I continued. "Maybe we could start with a smaller amount? Say $200,000? Helen's face tensed a little, but she quickly restored her smile. Dad, we've done the math. Anything less than that wouldn't even be enough to get us started. We need to rent an office, buy equipment, hire staff, start advertising. What about a bank loan? I suggested it. If your business plan is so good, a bank could— Banks don't lend to startups without a history, Clark interrupted. We've tried. They need either huge collateral or proven profitability. We have neither. I sighed. Something about their insistence, the way they were dismissing all the alternatives, made me nervous. I'm just afraid that if I give you all my savings and the business fails, I'll be left with nothing in my old age. Dad, Helen looked me straight in the eye, don't you want us to be happy, so we can finally live the life we deserve? Isn't that why you've worked and saved all your life? To provide for your family. That's it. A direct blow to my guilt and my duty as a father. Helen knew my weaknesses and pressed them mercilessly. Of course I want you to be happy, I said quietly. It's just that this is a very serious step. We understand, Clark interjected. And we're going to document it properly. You'll be an investor. You'll get a share of the profits. It's not a gift, Ray. It's a business arrangement. I nodded, not knowing what else to say. Part of me wanted to agree, just to see Helen rejoice. The other part was screaming danger. I need a little more time, I said finally, and I'd like to consult a lawyer about the paperwork. Helen and Clark looked at each other. Sure, Dad, Helen said, but I could see the shadow of irritation on her face. Just don't take too long. The place we've got our eye on isn't going to wait forever. After they left, I sat in silence for a long time, going over my options. $770,000, almost all I had. Money I'd been saving all my life, denying myself many things. Money that was supposed to provide for my old age. Money that Helen and Clark now wanted to take for their business. The next morning, I decided to consult an independent expert, Mike Donovan, a former colleague who had become a small business consultant after retirement, agreed to meet me at a coffee shop. $770,000 for an advertising agency with an insurance department? Mike looked over the copies of the business plan I'd brought. Sounds, ambitious. Too ambitious? I asked. Mike paused, searching for words. Let's just say that their financial projections are extremely optimistic. They expect 20% growth every quarter. That's unrealistic for a new business. And the idea? A combination of advertising and insurance? Unusual, but not unique. The big question is, do they have a client base? Arrangements with real estate agents, some kind of background? I didn't know the answer to that. Helen and Clark talked about connections and contacts, but they didn't mention specific names or companies. I see, Mike said, closing the folder. Ray, as a friend, I'll say this. Be careful. This sounds more like a dream than a sound business plan. His words echoed in my head when I got home. Helen and Clark were selling me a dream, not a business. But didn't I want their dreams to come true? In the evening, Alan called. So, have you decided? Almost, I replied. If I give them the money, I want to formalize everything legally. A contract, a share in the business, everything. So, you're going to give them the money? Alan sounded disappointed. This is my daughter, Alan. What if this business is her only chance? What if I say no and she regrets the opportunity for the rest of her life? What if you give the money, the business goes under, and you're left with nothing? Are you ready for that? I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to admit that such an outcome was very likely. Ray, Alan's voice softened. You're a good man and a good father. But sometimes to love is to be able to say no. Think about it. The next day, Helen arrived alone, without Clark. She looked serious and focused. Dad, I know you're hesitant and I understand why. But I want you to know that this isn't just business for me. It's a chance to prove to myself and to you that I can do something with my life. That I'm not just Clark's wife or your daughter, but an independent person with ambitions of my own. She sounded sincere, and for a moment I saw her as that little girl who dreamed of changing the world, who drew me birthday cards and climbed into my lap when she was afraid of a thunderstorm. I understand, Helen. I really do. Then will you help us? She took my hands. Please, Dad. I promise you won't regret it. In that moment, I made a decision. Not because I believed in their business plan. Not because I thought $700,000 was a sound investment, but because I couldn't say no to my daughter. Okay, I said. I'll help you, but on the condition that we do it the right way. I'll be an investor with a stake in the company and voting rights. Helen threw herself around my neck. Thanks, Dad. You don't know how much this means to us. I hugged her back, hoping I wasn't making the biggest mistake of my life. The following week, Helen, Clark, and I met with the lawyer I'd chosen, not an acquaintance of theirs, but an independent specialist recommended by Alan. Stephen Holt, an older man with a keen eye, listened carefully to the terms of our arrangement and suggested a structure for the deal. You put up $770,000 as an investment and get 30% of the company, he said, looking at me. I'd recommend staggered financing, the first tranche now, and the rest as you reach certain milestones. No, Clark objected quickly. We need the whole amount at once for the launch. Rent, equipment, staff. All of that needs to be invested immediately. Stephen raised an eyebrow. That's pretty risky for an investor. It's my daughter and son-in-law. They're not strangers, I said, though my inner voice was screaming that the lawyer was right. Stephen nodded, but his look made it clear that he thought I was naive. In that case, I would insist that the contract include terms to protect your investment, a clear definition of the intended use of the funds, regular financial reporting, your right to be audited. Helen sighed. Dad, are all these formalities really necessary? We're a family. That's exactly why they are necessary, Stephen replied firmly. Business relations between relatives should be particularly well defined to avoid misunderstandings and conflicts in the future. I agreed with the lawyer, and despite Helen and Clark's displeasure, we had 2 more meetings, working out the details of the contract. I insisted that the money be deposited into a special company account, not their personal accounts, and that all major expenditures require my approval. Finally, the paperwork was ready. We met in Stephen's office for the signing. Helen and Clark read each page carefully, occasionally glancing over at each other. I noticed that their enthusiasm waned noticeably when it came to specific obligations and responsibilities. Is everything okay? I asked, noticing their hesitation. Yes, of course, Helen answered quickly. It's just that legal language is so complicated. We signed the contract. I felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. Now all that was left was to transfer the money. The next day I went to the bank. $770,000, almost all of my savings, not counting my house and pension. A sum I'd saved up all my life, denying myself a lot of things. That's a very large transfer, Mr. Blackwell, said the bank manager, Gregory Pierce. May I inquire as to its purpose? An investment in my daughter's business, I replied, holding out a copy of the agreement. Gregory looked over the documents carefully. Everything looks properly executed. However, given the size of the amount and the fact that it is personal funds, the bank is obliged to inform you about some security measures. He explained that when transferring such large sums, the bank automatically tracks the movement of funds for the first few days to prevent possible fraud. If the funds are used for purposes other than those specified in the contract, for example, transferred to personal accounts or used for large non-business related purchases, we temporarily block the account until the circumstances are clarified. Is that standard procedure? I asked, suddenly interested. Yes, to protect clients, especially in cases where family relationships are involved. We've seen a lot of cases of, he hesitated, financial abuse between relatives. I nodded, feeling strangely relieved by this information. It was as if the bank was giving me extra protection that I hadn't dared to ask for myself. It was clear. I agree with these arrangements. Gregory processed the transfer, and I signed all the necessary documents. $770,000 went into the business account of Helen and Clark's new company. "It's done, Mr. Blackwell," Gregory said, handing me a receipt. "I wish your daughter the best of luck with her new business." "Thank you," I replied, feeling a strange emptiness inside. The deed was done. Now I could only hope that I hadn't made the biggest mistake of my life. That evening, Helen called to confirm receipt of the transfer. "Dad, the money's here!" Her voice was ringing with excitement. "Everything worked out." "Good," I replied, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. "Now you can start working on the office." "Right. Clark and I have already contacted the landlord. Tomorrow we'll sign the lease and get the keys." "That's great. Keep me posted." "I will, Dad. Thank you. I really do. You have no idea how much this means to us." There was something in her voice, special, more sincere than usual. Or was it just something I wanted to believe? "You know," Helen continued, "Clark and I want to take you to dinner tomorrow to celebrate the beginning of our project together. 7 p.m. at the River Grill." The River Grill was the most expensive restaurant in Minot, a place for special occasions. "Sure, I'd love to," I agreed. "Great. I'll see you tomorrow, Dad." I hung up the phone, feeling strangely elated. Maybe things would really work out. Maybe this business would bring us closer together, make us a family and not just people bound by blood and a sense of duty. The next morning I woke up at first light, as usual. Showered, shaved, made coffee. The usual routine that gave me a sense of stability. Only today everything seemed a little different, like there was a premonition of change in the air. I planned to stop by the bank to see if my remaining accounts were okay after yesterday's big transfer. Then I wanted to stop by the dry cleaners to pick up my suit. I wanted to look decent for dinner tonight. As I left the house, I noticed an envelope slipped under the door, a plain white envelope with no writing on it. Strange, the letter carrier always left the mail in the box by the roadside. I opened it and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a short note, typed on a computer. "Goodbye, old man." Just 2 words, but they felt like they hit me under the breath. I reread the note, not understanding its meaning. Who had written it? Why? I immediately called Helen. Ringing, and finally the machine said, "You've reached Helen Bailey. Leave a message after the beep." "Helen, it's Dad. Can you call me back, please? It's urgent." I dialed Clark's number. Same thing, straight to voicemail. The anxiety was building. I got in my car and drove to their house in the suburbs. I parked in the driveway, rang the doorbell. No one answered. I walked around the house, looked in the windows. It was quiet and empty inside. Mrs. Andrews, Helen and Clark's neighbor, was watering the flowers in her yard. "Mr. Blackwell," she called out to me. "Are you looking for Helen and Clark?" "Yes." I walked over to the fence. "Have you seen them today?" "Oh, they left early this morning. I was walking the dog around 6, saw them loading suitcases into a cab. Lots of suitcases." She raised her eyebrows meaningfully. I was also surprised. They hadn't said they were going on vacation. Suitcases, cab, early morning, and a note. "Goodbye, old man." A sudden realization pierced me, so obvious and so painful it took my breath away for a moment. They were gone, run away, with my money. "Thank you, Mrs. Andrews," I muttered and hurried to the car. On the way to the bank, I was still trying to come up with some rational explanation. Maybe they had an urgent business trip. Maybe the note was a stupid joke. Maybe. But deep down inside, I already knew the truth. Gregory Pierce, the bank manager, greeted me with a professional smile that faded slightly when he saw my face. "Mr. Blackwell, is everything all right?" "I'm not sure," I replied, taking a seat across from his desk. Yesterday, I transferred money into my daughter and her husband's business account. This morning, I found a strange note, and it looks like they've left town. I'd like to check into what's going on with that money." Gregory frowned. "Of course, let's look into it. But I must warn you that information about other people's accounts is confidential, even if it's about your relatives. I understand that, but I'm an investor in their business. It's in the contract I showed you yesterday." Gregory nodded and started typing something on the computer. He studied the screen for a couple minutes, his eyebrows rising higher and higher. "Mr. Blackwell," he finally said, "there is indeed some unusual activity here. At 7:30 this morning, there was an attempt to transfer $700,000 from a business account to Mr. and Mrs. Bailey's personal account. Then, at 8:15, there was an attempt to make a transaction for a large sum to a real estate agency in San Diego, San Diego, the other end of the country, as far away from Maynooth as possible." "And what happened to those attempts?" I asked, feeling everything inside go cold. "The bank's security system automatically blocked both transactions as suspicious," Gregory replied. "As I explained yesterday, with such large transfers, the bank monitors the movement of funds, especially if it does not correspond to the stated purpose. Transferring almost the entire amount to a personal account the day after you received it and trying to use the money to buy real estate in another state is clearly against the terms of the investment agreement you gave us." I felt both relieved and bitter at the same time. The money wasn't missing, but my daughter, my Helen, she did try to run off with my money. "What now?" I asked. "The account has been temporarily blocked until the circumstances are clarified. A notice has been sent to the account holders. They need to contact the bank and explain the situation. If the explanation is satisfactory, the blocking can be lifted. And if not, in such a case, given the presence of an investment agreement and a clear violation of its terms, you, as an investor, can initiate a procedure to return the funds, but this would require legal intervention." I nodded, trying to comprehend the situation. "Thank you, Gregory. I need to think about it." "Of course, Mr. Blackwell. I'm sorry about what happened. When I left the bank, I got in my car, but I didn't start the engine. I just sat there looking at nothing. $770,000. My life savings. My daughter tried to steal them and run away. My daughter, my Helen. I don't know how long I sat like that. Minutes? Hours? I was roused from my daze by the ringing of the phone. Helen's number. I stared at the screen for a long time before I answered it. "Yes? Dad?" Helen's voice sounded panicked. "Dad, what's going on? The bank's blocked our account. They're talking about some suspicious transactions, but we were just trying to rent an office and buy equipment. Lies. Such an obvious, such a painful lie." "Isn't that right, Helen?" My voice sounded unexpectedly calm. "An office in San Diego, $700,000 worth of equipment." Pause. A long, hard pause. "Dad, I can explain everything. Explain the goodbye, old man note. Explain the suitcases in the early morning. Explain why you were trying to transfer money into your personal account." Again, there was a pause. Then Helen changed tactics. "Okay, yes, we were going to move to California, but the business plan is real. We just wanted to open an agency there, not in Maynooth. More opportunities, more clients. And you couldn't just tell me that, instead of lying and manipulating and then running away? You wouldn't have agreed." There was a note of accusation in her voice. "You always wanted me to stay by your side, even if it meant burying yourself in this God-forsaken town." Her words hurt more than I'd expected. God-forsaken little town, the place where I'd spent my whole life, where Catherine and I raised Helen, where I hoped to live out my days in peace. "I never held you back, Helen," I said quietly. "You went away to study and I supported you. You married Clark even though I was against it, and I paid for your wedding anyway. I've always let you live your life. But only on your terms. Just so long as I remain the good daughter who visits you on Sundays and listens to your tedious stories. Every word was a stabbing blow. Tedious stories. I remembered reading to her before bed, talking about the stars, teaching her how to ride a bike. All those memories I treasured were just boring stories to her. "And that's why you decided to steal my money and run away?" I asked. "We didn't steal it." Helen was indignant. "It's an investment in the business. The fact that we wanted to open it elsewhere doesn't change anything." "Helen," I took a deep breath, "you were trying to transfer money into your personal account. This has nothing to do with business. It's theft." "God, Dad, you're so petty." She was almost screaming now. "It was a temporary measure. We needed to move the money quickly to make a deposit on the house and office." "The house?" I seized on that word. "What house?" There was another pause. Helen realized she'd blurted it out. "A small house in the suburbs of San Diego," she finally admitted. "Overlooking the ocean, 3 bedrooms, pool." "How much is it worth?" $650,000, she answered quietly. "But part of it could be used as a home office. It would be both a home and a business space at the same time. 650,000 out of 770. There would only be 120,000 left for business, even less if you took into account moving and setup costs. They weren't counting on any business, just a house by the ocean for my money." "Dad," Helen's voice became pleading, "help us unlock the account. Talk to the bank. Tell them it's okay, that you approve of what we're doing." "No," I said firmly. "What?" "I said no, Helen. I won't help you unlock the account." "But it's our money!" Now she was screaming. "You gave it to us." "I invested it in the business, not gave it to you for a house by the ocean." "You can't do that. We already quit our jobs. We've already rented the apartment. We have tickets to San Diego tomorrow." "It's your choice, Helen. You chose to lie to me, steal my money, and run away. Now live with the consequences." "You'll regret it." Her voice turned icy. "I swear you will. We'll find a way to get that money with or without your help." "Goodbye, Helen," I said, and hung up. I sat in the car, listening to the silence. Strangely, I felt no anger or grief, just tiredness and emptiness. It was as if something inside me had finally died. The phone rang again. Clark's number. I didn't answer it. Then another call from Helen. Again, no answer. They rang and rang, but I just stared at the screen, not moving. Finally, I started the car and drove home. On the way, I called Alan. "You were right," I said without preamble. "They were trying to steal the money and run off to California." "Jesus, Ray," Alan exhaled. "I'm so sorry." The bank blocked the account. Helen called, demanding that I help unblock it. I refused. "You were right to refuse. What now?" "I don't know," I said honestly. I don't know." When I got home, I found 5 more missed calls from Helen and 3 from Clark, and 1 voicemail. I pressed play. "Dad, it's me." Helen's voice sounded scared instead of angry. "Please call me back. We've gotten ourselves into a terrible situation. We've really quit our jobs and rented out our apartment. We have nowhere to go. I know you're angry and you have a right to be, but please don't leave us like this. We're your family no matter what." I deleted the message without listening to the end. Family. What a bitter irony. The person I loved more than anyone in the world, the person I was willing to give up everything for, tried to steal from me and run away. And now that her plan had failed, she was appealing to the bonds of family. I sat in the chair by the window, the same one I usually sat in after their visits, watching them leave. But today I was staring at nothing, trying to figure out when it all went wrong. When had my little girl, the one I loved so much, turned into someone capable of such betrayal? The phone rang again. This time the number was unrecognizable. I decided to answer it in case it was important. "Go ahead." "Mr. Blackwell?" An unfamiliar male voice. "My name is Trevor Morton. I'm Mr. and Mrs. Bailey's attorney. I'm calling about a situation with a blocked account. They've already hired a lawyer." That was fast. Go ahead, Mr. Morton. My clients claim that you invested $700,000 in their business. Is that correct? Yes, I invested in a business that was to open in Maynooth, not in a house in San Diego. Mr. Blackwell, the investment agreement does not specify a specific location for the business. It says an advertising agency with a real estate insurance division, but it doesn't specify a city or state. I froze. He was right. In the haste and hustle, we had not spelled out a specific location. Stephen Holt, the lawyer, had focused on the financial aspects and protecting the investment, but had missed this important point. However, I continued, the contract clearly states that the funds are to be used solely for business purposes. Buying a house is not a business purpose. My clients claim they plan to use part of the house as an office, which makes it a legitimate business investment. $650,000 for the house and only $120,000 for the business itself. That's inconsistent with the business plan they submitted. Plans change, Mr. Blackwell. Business is a dynamic environment. I felt anger building up inside. This man, this lawyer, was trying to whitewash an obvious fraud by using legal language. Mr. Morton, I said, trying to speak calmly. My daughter and son-in-law tried to transfer the money to their personal account the day after they received the investment. They left a goodbye old man note and tried to flee to another state. That's not a change of plans. That's fraud. That's your interpretation, Mr. Blackwell. My job is to protect my clients' interests, and it's in their best interest to have the account unlocked as soon as possible. I suggest you cooperate, or we'll have to take this matter to court. Do what you think is right, Mr. Morton, I said. I'm not going to help you unblock the account. I hung up, feeling strangely relieved. For the first time in my life, I had said no to Helen and not backed down. For the first time, I had put my interests ahead of her wishes. And even though it hurt, even though it meant the final breakup of the relationship, but at that moment I knew I was doing the right thing. The phone rang again. This time it was Helen's. I turned the sound off and put its screen down. I needed to think, to decide what to do next. But one thing I knew for sure, I wouldn't let them use me again. The night after Helen's call, I hardly slept at all. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, going over the events of the past weeks, months, years. Like a jigsaw puzzle, the pieces were coming together into a clear picture that I had refused to see before. I remembered how Helen only called when she needed something. How Clark always talked about my house. Nice place, great neighborhood, high value. How they'd started showing attention before every major request for money. All these years I'd thought I was a bad father, thought the strained relationship with my daughter was my fault. What if I had spent more time with her as a child, worked less, been more attentive? But now, lying in the dark, I was beginning to realize it wasn't me. In the morning I called Stephen Holt, the lawyer who had drawn up the investment agreement. Can they really win in court? I asked, explaining the situation. Stephen was silent for a moment, pondering the answer. Frankly speaking, the chances are about 50-50. On the one hand, the contract really doesn't specify a specific location for the business. On the other, there's a clear stipulation about the intended use of the funds, and the purchase of an apartment building is clearly inconsistent with the stated business goals. Plus, the attempted transfer to a personal account is a serious argument in your favor. What's your advice? Let's wait for their next move. If they do sue, we'll prepare a defense. In the meantime, the account is blocked. The money is safe. After talking to the lawyer, I decided to take a walk. I needed to clear my head, to think. The day was clear and cool. The leaves on the trees were beginning to turn yellow. Early fall in North Dakota always comes unexpectedly. I walked down familiar streets, past houses where people I'd known for years lived. Maynooth had never been a big city, but it was my home. Every stone here, every tree reminded me of something. Here's the park where I taught Helen to ride her bike. Here's the school where she went to school. Here's the cafe where Catherine and I used to go on Saturdays. God-forsaken town, Helen said. To her, this place was a prison she wanted to escape from. To me, it was the whole world. The phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Helen again. I didn't answer it. A minute later, a message came through. Dad, we need to talk. This is serious. Please call me back. I put the phone away and continued my walk. I walked into the park, sat on a bench by the pond. Ducks swam, begging for bread from the rare visitors. Life went on as if nothing had happened, as if my world hadn't been turned upside down. When I got home, there were 5 messages on my answering machine from Helen and Clark. I listened to them feeling nothing but tired. Dad, pick up the phone. We have to work this out. The lawyer says we can sue, but I don't want to do that. Call me. Ray, it's Clark. Listen, we understand you're upset, but let's work this out in a mature way. We need the money right away. We've already got everything organized for the move. Dad, it's me again. Please don't ignore us. We're your family no matter what. We can make things right. Mr. Blackwell, this is Trevor Morton. I left you a message on your cell phone, but you haven't called back. I strongly suggest you contact me before the situation goes to court. Dad, you're leaving us no choice. If you don't respond by tomorrow, we're filing a lawsuit. I don't want to do that, but you're forcing us to. I deleted all the messages and dialed Alan's number. They're threatening to sue, I said when he answered. I'm not surprised, Alan sighed. How are you? Strangely, but fine. It's like everything's finally falling into place. You know, I've felt for years that something was wrong with our relationship, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Well, it's clear now. You're a strong man, Ray. Stronger than you think. I don't know about strong. I'm just, tired of pretending. We agreed to meet at his place tonight. After the conversation, I decided to check my email. I hadn't looked at it for a long time. Among the spam and mailings was an email from Helen, sent a few hours ago. Dad, I understand that you're angry, and you have a right to be. Clark and I did the wrong thing by not discussing our plans to move to California with you. But understand, we just wanted to start a new life, break out of our rut. My knot was suffocating us. Yes, we planned to use most of the money to buy a house, but it would be an investment too. Real estate in San Diego is constantly rising in value. In a few years, the house would be worth a lot more. Please help us unlock the account. We are really in a terrible situation. No job, no place to live, with tickets booked and a down payment on a house that we will now lose. Let's find a compromise. Maybe we could use some of the money for moving and settling in and give the rest back to you. No matter what, I love you. You're my father. Helen. I reread the letter several times. Mayno was suffocating us. We just wanted to start a new life. Despite everything, I love you. Beautiful words that were meant to evoke sympathy, to stir fatherly love and guilt. They would have worked in the past. Not today. I closed the letter without responding. There was nothing to say. That evening, sitting in Alan's living room with a cup of tea, I told him about the letter. Classic manipulation, he shook his head. First an admission of guilt, but incomplete, with reservations. Then an explanation of why what they did was actually the right thing to do. Then a description of the horrible consequences, which were supposedly your fault. And at the end, a reminder of family ties and love. I've always fallen for it, I admitted. I always felt guilty if I didn't do what she wanted. Because you're a good man, Ray. You love your daughter and you want her to be happy. They took advantage of that. I remembered all those years of petty manipulation. How Helen complained about college until I let her drop out. How she introduced Clark to me, having already announced the engagement without asking my opinion. How they bought a house they couldn't afford knowing I wouldn't let them be homeless. Every time I caved, every time I felt guilty if I hesitated. You know what the weirdest thing is? I said to Alan. I always thought the problem was that I wasn't a good enough father, that if I was better she'd love me more, call me more, take care of me. But that's not the point, is it? The point is that she's just, that kind of person. Alan nodded. Some people are just selfish by nature. No matter what you do, they'll always think only of themselves. It's hard for me to accept that my daughter is that kind of person. I understand, but sometimes accepting the truth is the only way to move on. The next morning I was awakened by a phone call, an unfamiliar number. Mr. Blackwell? A woman's voice. My name is Sarah Jenkins from the Minot Daily News. We would like your comment on a statement made by your daughter. I sat up on the bed trying to figure out what she was talking about. What statement? Your daughter, Helen Bailey, has contacted our newsroom with a story about you allegedly holding her inheritance and trying to control her life. She claims you promised her money for a business and then changed your mind when you found out she wanted to move out of Maynooth. I couldn't believe my ears. Helen went to the paper, decided to embarrass me publicly. That's a complete lie, I replied, trying to remain calm. I invested in their business that was supposed to open here in Maynooth. They tried to use the money to buy a house in California and run away, leaving me a note saying, "Goodbye, old man." The bank blocked the account for breach of the investment agreement. Do you have proof? Sure. The investment agreement, the business plan, the note they left, the bank's records of the attempted transfer to the personal account. I can provide all of that. Okay, Mr. Blackwell, we'd like copies of these documents for fact-checking purposes. I agreed to send her the documents and hung up, stunned. Helen wasn't just trying to steal my money. Now she was trying to smear me publicly, to make me look like a tyrant holding back her inheritance, as if the money I'd earned through hard work already belonged to her. I gathered all the documents, scanned them, and sent them to the editor. Then I called Stephen Holt to alert him to this new turn of events. "Don't worry, Mr. Blackwell," the lawyer said after I told him about the call from the newspaper. "Defamation is a serious charge. If they publish false allegations, we can sue for honor and dignity." "I don't want to sue my own daughter," I sighed. "I understand. But sometimes you have to protect your reputation, especially in a small town where everyone knows everyone else." After talking to the lawyer, I finally decided to listen to the new messages from Helen. There were 3, all left last night. "Dad, why aren't you answering your cell phone? We're trying to solve a problem and you're just ignoring us. It's not fair. If you don't answer, we'll be forced to take more serious action. We have no choice. Realize that. Last chance, Dad. Call me back before morning or blame yourself." Apparently, serious measures had already been taken, contacting the newspaper. I deleted all the messages and blocked their numbers. Enough was enough. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me anymore. In the afternoon, Sarah Jenkins from the paper called. "Mr. Blackwell, we've reviewed the documents you provided. They fully corroborate your version of events. We won't publish your daughter's statement because it doesn't fit the facts. I apologize for the inconvenience." "Thank you," was all I could say. "If I may ask you a personal question, why did your daughter think that her version would be accepted when there are documents that clearly refute it?" I wondered. Why was Helen so sure that she would be believed and not me? "I think she was just used to people believing her," I finally answered. "Especially me." After that call, I felt strangely relieved. It was as if the last thread tying me to my illusions about my daughter had finally been severed. I saw her as she was, not the idealized image I had created, but a real person with all her flaws. The phone rang again. This time it was Clark, calling from an unknown number. "Ray, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "Helen did something stupid with that paper, I know, but the situation is really critical. We have nowhere to go." "What about your house?" I asked. "The one you lived in before this adventure? We've already rented it out to the new tenants. They're moving in at the end of the week. And your job? We've already quit." Helen even made a scene in the office, told her boss what she thought of him. I almost chuckled. Typical Helen, burning bridges without thinking of the consequences. Well, that's your choice, I said. Not mine. Ray, look. Clark's voice became pleading. We admit we did wrong, but we're desperate. At least some of the money, say 100,000, just so we can rent an apartment and find a new job. No, I answered firmly. I won't give you a dime. You tried to steal my money to run away without a trace, and when the plan failed, you started threatening and slandering me. Why should I help you after that? Because Helen's your daughter, Clark's last trump card. Yes, she is my daughter, and that's why I'm so disappointed. I expected more from her. Both of you. I hung up the phone, feeling strangely calm. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being manipulated. For the first time, I put my own interests before theirs, and it was, liberating. In the evening, there was a knock on the door. I opened it and saw Helen crying, her hair disheveled. She looked awful, as if she hadn't slept in days. Dad, her voice trembled, please help us. We've lost everything. We have nothing left. I looked at her, and a strange feeling swept over me. This was my daughter, the person I loved most in the world. But at the same time, a stranger capable of lies, manipulation, and betrayal. Helen, I said quietly, I loved you from the first day of your life, gave you everything I could, supported you even when I didn't approve of your decisions, but you never appreciated that. To you, I've always been just a source of money. That's not true, she exclaimed. I love you, Dad. You love what I can give you. It's not the same thing. How can you say that? Tears ran down her cheeks. After everything that's happened between us? What was between us, Helen? I asked quietly. When was the last time you called just to check on me? Not to ask for money or help, but just to talk. When was the last time you took an interest in my life? She opened her mouth but couldn't find anything to say. Exactly, I nodded. Our relationship has always been one-sided. I gave, you took. And you know what? I'm tired. What do you want from me? Helen's voice became hard. For me to crawl on my knees, begging for forgiveness. That I give up my life and stay in this hole taking care of you. That's your condition. I don't want anything from you, Helen. Here's the thing. I've finally realized that our relationship will never be what I dreamed it would be. You'll never love me the way I love you, and I accept that. So you're just throwing me out of your life? Your only daughter? No, Helen. You're the one who threw me out of your life when you decided to steal my money and run away. When you wrote, "Goodbye, old man." I'm just accepting your decision. Her face changed. The mask of vulnerability fell away, exposing anger and contempt. You're going to regret this, she hissed. I swear you'll regret it. Goodbye, Helen, I said, and closed the door. I heard her banging and yelling for a while longer, but I didn't open it. Finally, the sounds died down and I heard a car pull away. She was gone. And this time, probably for good. I sat down in the chair by the window, the same one I'd spent so many evenings in looking out at the empty street after they'd left. But tonight, I didn't feel the usual longing and loneliness, only a strange, quiet calm, as if the heavy weight I had been carrying for years had finally fallen from my shoulders. The next day, I learned from Helen and Clark's neighbor that they had moved out of their house during the night, loading their belongings into a rented truck. No one knew where they were headed. Maybe to California, after all, just without the luxurious oceanfront home. Maybe somewhere else. I didn't try to find them. There was no point. Our paths had diverged, and maybe that was best for everyone. It had been 2 weeks since Helen and Clark had disappeared from Maynooth. 2 weeks of silence that at first seemed like a blessing, but then began to press down with a strange heaviness. Not that I'd missed their manipulations and demands. No, of course not. But the idea that my only daughter had simply disappeared from my life, leaving behind only bitterness and disappointment, was painful. Stephen Holt, my lawyer, called Monday morning. "Mr. Blackwell, I have news. Your daughter's attorney has contacted me. They want to discuss the possibility of a settlement. I sat in the kitchen, clutching the phone receiver, looking out the window at my garden. The roses that Catherine loved so much had already bloomed, but the bushes were still standing strong, ready for winter. "What kind of arrangement?" I asked. "They give up the idea of a lawsuit and agree to return most of the money. In return, they ask that you not press charges of fraud and let them keep some of the money." "How much do they want to keep?" "500,000. I chuckled. Even now, backed into a corner, they were trying to bargain for the maximum. "No, that's too much." "I thought you'd say no." Stephen sounded pleased. "How much would you consider acceptable?" I wondered. Money wasn't the main problem. Yes, 770,000 was a lot, but I still had a house and a pension. I could live the rest of my life comfortably even if I didn't pay back a dime. It was about principle. It was about showing Helen and Clark that there were consequences to their actions. 300,000, I said finally. They could keep 300,000. They have to pay the rest back. "All right, I'll pass on your offer, but I must warn them that they may not agree." "Then let them go to court," I said firmly. "I'm ready for that." After talking to Stephen, I called Gregory Pierce, the bank manager, to clarify the details of a possible refund. "If there is an agreement, we can arrange the transfer so that the 300,000 stays in their account and the rest is returned to you," Gregory explained. "It would require your written consent and a similar document from them." "What about the legal side? Is there anything special that needs to be done?" "I would recommend that you have a settlement agreement drawn up through a lawyer. It should clearly state that this is a final decision and the parties waive any further claims against each other." I agreed and thanked him for his advice. I hung up the phone and went to the window. The day was clear, with that special autumn light that makes all contours clear and colors deep. People were walking down the street minding their own business. Life went on. Stephen called back 2 days later. "They've refused your offer," he said without preamble. "They insist on 450,000. My answer remains the same, 300,000. No more." That's what I said. They took time to think it over. How long does it take them to realize that their position is hopeless? I couldn't contain my irritation. "We have evidence of their attempted fraud. If it goes to trial, they could lose everything." "I think they realize that," Stephen replied, "but they're still trying to make the best of it. The classic negotiation tactic is to start with an inflated amount and slowly bring it down." "Well, I've got time," I said. "I'm in no hurry." That evening I received an email from Helen, the first direct message from her in a while. "Dad, I know you're angry, and I understand why. Clark and I did the wrong thing by not discussing our plans with you. It was a mistake and I regret it, but now we're in a desperate situation. We're living in a motel, running out of money, no jobs. Clark's trying to find something in the insurance industry, but it's hard without references. I've sent out resumes to dozens of advertising agencies, but so far, nothing. Please, Dad, I'm asking you for at least 400 grand. That's enough to rent a decent apartment and keep us going until we find a job. I know you offered 300, but it's really not enough, especially in California where everything is so expensive. No matter what, I'm still your daughter, and I still love you, Helen." I reread the letter several times, trying to find sincerity in it, but all I saw was the same manipulation I'd always seen. "We're desperate. Money is running out. I'm still your daughter." All the same leverage she'd been pushing for years. I didn't answer. The next day, Stephen called. "They've agreed to 350,000, he said. It was their final offer. "My offer was the last offer too," I replied. 300,000, not a cent more. I'll pass it on, but I must warn you that they may decide to go to trial." "Let them decide," I said calmly. "I'm ready." That evening I got a call, Helen's number. I stared at the screen for a long time before I answered. "Yes?" "Dad, Helen's voice sounded tense. "We'll agree to 300,000, but on one condition." "What's that?" "We want a face-to-face meeting before we sign the agreement. We want to talk face-to-face, without lawyers." I sighed. Of course they wanted a meeting. One last chance to pressure, to manipulate, to make me feel guilty. "Only in the presence of Stephen Holt," I said firmly, "and in his office." A pause. Then, "Okay. When?" We arranged to meet the next day at 10 in the morning. I didn't sleep well all night, turning from side to side, going over possible scenarios in my head. What would Helen say? Would she cry, threaten, beg? What would I say? In the morning, I'd chosen my suit carefully. Not the best, but solid enough. I didn't want to look as if I attached too much importance to the meeting, but I also didn't want to appear sloppy. Strange sensitivity, given the circumstances. Stephen's office was in downtown Maynooth, a small glass and concrete building, one of the few modern structures in our old-fashioned town. The receptionist ushered me into the conference room, where Stephen was waiting. "They're not here yet," he said, shaking my hand. "But they should be here any minute. How are you feeling?" "I'm fine," I answered. "I just want this to be over." Before we could continue our conversation, the door opened and Helen and Clark walked in, accompanied by their lawyer, Trevor Morton. Helen looked gaunt with circles under her eyes. Clark kept behind her as if using her as a shield. "Mr. Blackwell," Morton nodded. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." I nodded back without saying a word. We sat down at the table, Stephen and I on one side, the three of them on the other, like opponents in a battle. "So," Stephen began, "we are here to discuss the terms of the settlement agreement. Mr. Blackwell agrees that Mr. and Mrs. Bailey keep $300,000 of the amount invested, subject to the return of the remaining $470,000. Both parties waive any further claim against each other, and the matter is considered closed. Is that a correct statement of the terms?" Everyone nodded. "Before we proceed to the signing of the papers," Morton interposed, "Mrs. Bailey would like to say a few words to her father. In private, if possible." I shook my head. Anything Helen wants to say, she can say here and now. Helen sighed and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite make out, a mixture of resentment, anger, and perhaps shame. "Okay," she said. "Dad, I know you think Clark and I were trying to deceive you, and yes, we weren't completely honest about our plans, but we really were going to use some of the money for business, just in California, not in Maynooth. We didn't want to tell you about moving because we knew you'd be against it." I looked at her without saying a word. She continued, "We never planned to completely disappear from your life. The note was a stupid, impulsive act. I just felt like I was suffocating here, you know? Minot was never a place I wanted to spend my whole life." "And that's why you decided to steal my money?" I asked calmly. "Instead of just telling the truth?" "It's not stealing," Helen was indignant. "You agreed to invest in our business." "In a business in Maynooth, Helen, not in the house in San Diego. The house would have been part of the business. We'd use it as an office." "That's enough," I interrupted her. "We both know there was no business planned. You just wanted to get out of Maynooth with my money." There was silence. Helen and Clark looked at each other, their lawyer coughing awkwardly. "If that's all you have to say," Stephen interjected, "let's move on to the documents." Morton nodded and pulled a folder out of his briefcase. "We've prepared an agreement in accordance with the agreed terms. You can read it." Stephen took the document and read it carefully, sometimes making notes. Then he handed it to me. I looked through the document. The legal language was complicated, but the gist of it was simple. Helen and Clark get $300,000 and the rest is returned to me. Both parties waive any further claims. "I agree," I said, handing the document back to Stephen. As the lawyers discussed the details, I looked at Helen. She sat with her head down, avoiding my gaze. She looked defeated, but I didn't believe that look. I knew too well her ability to manipulate, to play the victim when it was advantageous. Finally, the papers were ready. We all signed 3 copies, one for each party and one for the bank. "That's it," Stephen said, gathering up the papers. "The bank will receive a copy of the agreement today. After that, the funds will be unlocked and disbursed as agreed." We all stood up. The moment was awkward. What to say after this? Helen solved the problem by stepping toward me. "Dad, I know you're angry right now, but hopefully in time you'll be able to forgive us. We're still a family no matter what." I looked at her, at this woman who was my daughter but had become a stranger. $300,000, Helen," I said quietly. "Consider this your last gift, and the last contact between us." Her face changed. The mask of vulnerability fell away, giving way to cold anger. "Whatever you say," she hissed. "Come on, Clark." They walked out without looking back. Trevor Morton shook my hand, dryly, professionally, and followed them out. Stephen and I were alone in the conference room. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yes," I answered, wondering how true that was. "I'm fine." When I left Stephen's office, I decided to walk, despite the drizzle. I needed to think, to make sense of what had happened. $300,000. I'd given my daughter $300,000 to disappear from my life. It sounded awful when you think about it, but liberating at the same time. At home, the first thing I did was call Alan to tell him about the meeting. "Was it over?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "They agreed to $300,000. The rest will come back to me as soon as the bank processes the paperwork." "How do you feel about that?" I wondered. How do I feel? There was no grief, no anger, no relief, just emptiness. Like a long, tedious chapter of my life had ended, and I didn't know what would happen next. "It's okay," I finally answered. "Just fine." The next day, I received a short text from Stephen. "All paperwork has been processed and the money has been distributed as agreed. Case closed." Case closed. Such a formal phrase for such an emotional event. But perhaps that's how it should have been treated, as a case that was now closed. I checked my bank account online. $470,000 was back. Not the full amount I'd invested, but most of it. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of my days without worrying about finances. That afternoon, I decided to walk to the park. It was a beautiful day, sunny, with a slight breeze, smelling of fall. On the way, I met Mrs. Jenkins, a neighbor who lived 3 houses down from me. "Raymond," she waved at me. "It's been a long time. How are you?" "Fine, Mrs. Jenkins, thank you. How are you?" "Can't complain. My arthritis is bothering me, but that's normal at my age. By the way, I heard Helen and her husband moved out of town." "Well then, the news has spread. Maynooth is a small town. Secrets don't live long here." "Yes," I answered simply. "They decided to start a new life elsewhere. It's a shame. I always thought Helen was a good girl. But young people are on the move all the time now, aren't they? Not like us these days." I nodded, not wanting to go any further. Mrs. Jenkins, thankfully, didn't insist, and went on to discuss the weather and plans for the winter. In the park, I sat on a bench by the pond. Ducks swam about, begging for bread from the rare visitors. Life went on as if nothing had happened, as if my world hadn't been turned upside down. Strangely, the thought didn't cause pain, only acceptance. This was the way it was supposed to happen. Maybe not as dramatically, not through betrayal and lies, but sooner or later our paths would have parted. We were too different, me and my daughter. In the evening, Alan called, "How about dinner at my place? Nothing fancy, just steak and potatoes. And maybe a game of chess." "Sounds great," I agreed. "I'll be there in an hour." At Alan's, we talked about everything but Helen and money, politics, sports, fishing, winter plans. Just the usual conversation between 2 old friends, and it was exactly what I needed. "You know," Alan said as I was about to leave, "you look better, calmer." "That's how I feel," I admitted. "It's weird, isn't it? I should be grieving the loss of my daughter, and instead you feel relieved, Alan finished for me. And there's nothing strange about that, Ray. You've been carrying the burden of a toxic relationship for years. Now you're free of it. I nodded. He was right. The days were adding up to weeks. I was back to my usual routine: breakfast, newspaper, walk, lunch, reading, dinner, TV, sleep. But something had changed. I no longer felt the tension, the constant anxiety that had accompanied me for years. I wasn't waiting for the next call asking for money. I didn't prepare for the monthly visits that always left me feeling empty and inadequate. Life became simpler, calmer. And in that calm, I found a strange contentment. Not happiness, no. Too much had been lost for happiness. But satisfaction, yes. As if I were finally free of the heavy weight I had been carrying for so long that I had ceased to notice it. There was no word from Helen. No calls, no letters, no messages. It was as if she had truly disappeared from my life. Sometimes, lying awake at night, I thought of her, not the grown woman who had tried to steal from me, but the little girl with pigtails who had once looked at me with adoration. Thought about how she'd changed, how we'd both changed, and tried to figure out exactly when it all went wrong. I couldn't find the answer. Maybe it didn't exist. Maybe some things just happen, and all we can do is accept them and move on. And so I moved on, day by day, step by step. Not happy, but not miserable either. Just living my life without toxicity, without manipulation, without constant guilt. Sometimes I wondered how Helen and Clark's life had turned out. Had they moved to California? Had they found jobs? Were they happy? But those thoughts came less and less often and eventually almost disappeared. Life went on. Not the kind I had expected, not the kind I had dreamed of when I held newborn Helen in my arms, but my own life, one in which I could finally breathe freely. And maybe, in the end, that was what mattered most.